seen that movie, and it's a great thing to encourage little kids to focus not on the bad, but on the good. But today I want to talk about favorite things, because favorite things can end up being really bad things if they're not the right things. And we've been looking at this idea of being a fan or a follower of Jesus Christ, and how we're supposed to make sure that we make the right choice, because there's too many people who are sitting in chairs, in pews, cheering God on, saying, I'm a fan of Jesus Christ, but they're not willing to be a follower of Jesus Christ. And today, I want to talk about that, and that song was just a little reminder, or a little introduction to the whole idea of favorite things, but I want to talk about how favorite things can take a bad turn. And it starts off with this beautiful story of a young man. Actually, he was a little boy, and he'd been looking forward to a special time with his dad, and he had a chance to go and do a special outing with his dad. His dad says, I have just the thing for you. We are going to go to an old-fashioned soda fountain burger shop. We're going to go, and you're going to have the biggest burger you've ever seen in your life, and you get to have a big drink, and we're going to have a great, and if you're really good, we'll have ice cream when it's all said and done. And this little boy was just so excited. He got there, and it was old-fashioned. It looked like you'd see a little diner from the 50s, and they walked in, and he was just excited, and they ordered, and when the burger came, his eyes just got huge, because he'd never seen a burger that big. And he didn't know how he was going to eat it, but he was just so excited, and he just started stuffing it down his face, and he didn't get it all done. He got a lot of it on him, but he was just excited. He was spending time with his dad, and he had a drink to wash it all down, and it was great. And then finally his dad goes, okay, come with me. And they went over to the ice cream counter. And his dad said, you can have any ice cream you want. What is your favorite ice cream? And this little boy looked at all the list that was up there, and he started reading the list. And there was chocolate. There was chocolate with marshmallow. There was, and he just went through all these flavors, dozens of flavors. And it took him a couple minutes to get through them all. And when he got done, his dad was smiling. He goes, okay, son, what is your favorite? Which one do you want? And he looked at the list, and he started reading the list again. And his dad was very patient, got through the list twice. Okay, son, now that we know what's on the list, which one is your favorite? Which one do you want? And he started reading the list again. About halfway through, his dad stopped and goes, son, you have to pick your favorite. And he goes, but Dad, they're all my favorite. And because he wouldn't make a choice as to which one was his favorite, he ended up leaving without any ice cream that day. Because he couldn't choose. Now you might be going, that's a cute story with a sad ending, Pastor. Why did you tell the story? Because that's the way we are a lot when it comes to God. We have a lot of favorites, and God is one of those things that we add into all the other favorites. But God says you have to choose one. And because we don't choose one, we really don't get satisfaction out of any of them. And we need to look at that today as we look at our text. And I just want to remind you that a fan of Jesus Christ is simply this: someone who is an enthusiastic admirer that cheers from their place of comfort, someone who wants to get close enough to the real thing so that they get the benefits, but not close enough to have any change happen in their life. And we've been looking at that, and today we're going to look at the fact that Jesus wants to be your one and only, not one of many. And we tend to add Jesus to our life so he's one of many. So we have our favorites. This is my favorite person. This is my favorite soda. This is my favorite God. We don't ever actually say that, but we just add him to our list. We might even make him number one on our priority list, and God doesn't want to be number one on your priority list. He wants to be your list, not number one on your list. And we need to understand that. In fact, if we look at our text today, it's found in Luke chapter 14. And as we look at this, in Luke chapter 14, Jesus is teaching. And in verse 26, actually in verse 25, he comes and he does something that you don't usually see preachers or pastors do. Because it says here, and in verse 25 of Luke 14, large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he said, if anyone comes after me and does not hate his father and mother, his wife and children, his brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. And anyone who doesn't carry his cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. I want you to think about that. Jesus has a great crowd following him. He has a lot of fans. He goes, want you. He turns to the people and says, this is ridiculous. You guys are excited for all the wrong reasons, and it's time that we just drew the line and we need to have people go home. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to a church where the pastor goes, okay, there's just too many people here, and it's time for some of you to go home, so you need to get up and leave, and this is who should leave. Have you ever been to a church like that? Yeah, no one has ever been to a church like that. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense from our perspective because we view success in the wrong way. We view success in crowds and big budgets and lots of people following and excitement. God views success as in changed lives who are fully devoted to following Him. And we need to adopt God's perspective. He doesn't want the crowd. He wants the committed. He doesn't want the fan. He wants the follower. And then Jesus goes on to say, okay, this is how you define a follower really quickly. You have to be hated and hate your father, mother, wife, husband, brothers, sisters, children. God's a God of love. Why would He tell you to hate? We're going to explain that in a minute. It doesn't mean He actually wants you to go around hating them. Oh, there's my wife. Okay, it's nothing like that. Because He wants you to love, but He wants your love for Him to be so much higher than your love for anything else that there's no comparison. He wants your love for Him to be so greater than your compassion for anyone else that it seems like you want to ignore and leave behind and quote-unquote hate them because of your passion for God. Because if God isn't that in your life, then you're not really choosing to follow Him. You're choosing to be a fan, to claim the name and the benefits, but not pay the price. And that's what the rest of our text goes on to say. If you look at verse 28, it says, suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Will he not first sit down and consider whether he is able with 10,000 men, to see if he has enough money to complete it? For if he lays a foundation and is not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule him, saying, this fellow began to build and was not able to finish it. So he's saying, aren't you going to consider the cost of what it takes to accomplish what you say you want to do? And then he goes on. He has this one comparison of building a tower. And do we sit down and figure out the expected expenses and then, okay, there's going to be automatic overages because that's the way life goes. So we have those built into our budget so we can actually finish what we start. But then it says in verse 31, or suppose a king is about to go to war against another king. Will he not first sit down and consider whether he is able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him? With 20,000? If he's not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off and ask for terms of peace. In the same way, any of you who does not give up everything he has cannot be my disciple. And it's interesting because he's trying to give us a comparison, and then it seems that he jumps in his examples. Because he goes on in the last little bit, in verse 34, he says, salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is fit for neither the soil nor the manure pile. It is thrown out. Then he who has an ear, let him hear. And you might think, why did God jump from these watch what you do and make sure you've counted the cost so you can complete it to an illustration about salt? Well, it's really simple. If you don't count the cost so that you can finish it, you will lose your saltiness as a Christian and you will become worthless or useless. We have to count the cost, or the end result of our life is a life that is a worthless life. So here's just a question to get us thinking, and we're just jumping right into it, because it's a question that makes us stop and go, At least it should make us stop and go, And that first question, as we've read our text, is this: will you let following God interfere with other parts of your life? I want you to think about that really seriously, because that comes down to one of the key issues, and we're going to hit it right at the end. Will we let following God interfere with our plans, our dreams, our desires, our efforts, our work, our relationships? Will we let that interfere? Because if we're not, then we are not really following Him. We have not given up everything. If you remember, Jesus says in the very beginning to the large crowds, if anyone comes after me, this is verse 26, and does not hate his father and mother, his son, his daughter, his brothers, his sisters. We need to make sure that God has permission to interrupt any aspect of our life to do his will if we're going to follow him. So think about it. If you're a student, are you going to let God interrupt your studies? And some of you go, anytime he wants, I hate studying. No, I'm not talking about that. Say you've been 2 to 3 years in pursuing your degree, and God says, I want you to go on a missions trip. Are you willing to stop going to school to follow God? Or, well, I can't do that now, God. I mean, I'm almost done. I have to finish. Well, then who's Lord of your life? Who are you following? God's plans and his footsteps, or your plans and your footsteps? We need to be willing to let God interrupt. Okay, work. We could do the same thing about work, since many of us work. How about sports and leisure? Do we let God interrupt those? We had 4th of July this past week. Did we let God interrupt our 4th of July to do what he wanted to do? Or were we so intent on having fun with our family and our friends that God couldn't be part of it? Well, no, Pastor Rob, I wouldn't say that. Okay, so how did God interrupt your 4th of July to use you for his glory? If there's silence, maybe we need to pause and think. Were we going to let God interrupt our time? We can go on. We can talk about relationships. We can talk about dreams, desires, family, friends, comfort, convenience. Are we willing to let God into every aspect of our life, to change every aspect of our life so that we are following him and not just a fan of his? Remember, the second part of the definition of a fan is you get close enough for the benefits, but not close enough to be changed by. A follower is always changed by God. And yes, it starts when you invite God to be part of your life and to become your life. But then as he becomes part of your life, he starts pointing out things that you need to change. He's pointing out things that don't line up with his standards. And we sometimes try to hide it. If you ever want to read a good allegory of this, a modern day allegory or a modern day parable, look up and find a copy of My Heart, Christ Home. It's a great allegory about living with God. And how we let him into the living room because we always keep the living room nice because that's where we want people to come and hang out. And even the kitchen looks pretty good because, kitchens are part of life and we want him there. But then he goes into the study and he sees what we put in our mind. He goes into the entertainment room to see what we find amusing or entertaining. He goes into our workshop to see what we've been trying to build with our life. He goes into our bedroom to see how much leisure time or rest that we take. And on the way to the bedroom, he passes that hall closet that we keep locked. And he stops and he goes, there's a weird smell coming from that closet. I need access to that closet. We're like, no, you can have access to anything, not the closet. No, don't go to the bathroom either, it's messy. But God, if he's going to be Lord of all, if we're going to follow him, has to have access to everything. And we have to give him the permission to interrupt every aspect of our life. Are we willing to do that? And I don't want the good Christian, of course, Pastor Rob, answer. I want you to really think about it. Are you willing to let God interrupt your life? Think about your plans. Think about the things you cherish the most, your favorite things, and compare them to God's things. Are you willing to let God's things interrupt your favorite things so that you're living God's plan? That's what we're talking about. And it's just a bare bones, here's what Jesus is talking about, here's what we need to face, here's what we need to deal with, and there's not a lot of wiggle room in this. He doesn't give us any room to squirm. He paints it in the most drastic picture he can. Let's go back to our text. Starting verse 25 again. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them he said, if anyone comes after me and does not hate his father and mother, his wife, his children, his brothers, cannot be my disciple. And anyone who does not carry his cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. That's pretty cut and dry, bare bones statements. You cannot be my disciple. You cannot be a follower of mine if you don't do this. And I hate to say it, but we live in a culture where doing this is uncomfortable and we don't like things that are uncomfortable. We get rid of things that are uncomfortable. We change things that are uncomfortable instead of learning the lesson that we should and adapting to God's plans. And God's challenging us. God is challenging me. here I am preparing for this message, and I have been for a month and a half, and God challenges me. How valuable is your family compared to me? And here's the illustration. Your daughter's missing. What are you going to do now? It's a challenge. But it's real. Because God wants fully committed followers. Because He can turn the world upside down. He can do amazing things with fully committed followers. With fans, they can make a lot of hot air. And that's about it. And knowing what the temperature is going to be this week, we don't need any more hot air. So we need followers. We need followers of Jesus Christ. And as you think about that, it brings us to our second point, and that is, as we look at this, Jesus doesn't want to be one of many interests and desires. He wants to be our one and only interest and desire. Now that doesn't mean, as a father of 10 and a husband, that I'm supposed to walk away from my family and go live as a hermit. No, my passion and love for Him is supposed to be the overriding thing that I always focus my life on. Because if my relationship with God is that, He will take care of my relationship with my wife. He'll take care of my relationship with my kids. He'll take care of my business and my leisure and everything else. But if I get Him out of the priority, if I take Him out of being my life and try to focus on doing all these other things, all of a sudden these other things start falling apart. And I wonder where God is. And He's still where I left Him. Because He doesn't go away. And so as you look at this, you might think, well, isn't that selfish of God? He wants to be your only thing? Your one and only? How can God ask that? He asks that because His love for us demands nothing less. Why don't you think about it? It was a beautiful spring afternoon. And a young couple was out for a romantic picnic. They'd gone for a peaceful float down a river in a boat. And when they landed, there's a beautiful willow tree there. And under the willow tree, picnic was set up. And the girl was looking at the boy. And he could, yeah, I planned this. And they got out. And they had this beautiful picnic dinner. And when they were done with it, he gets down on one knee and reaches into the picnic basket and brings out that ring. And she's overcome with joy. Really? Are you sure? He goes, yes. Today, I'm asking you to marry me, and I will be your one and only from now on. Every weekend, I'll be exclusively yours, but during the days of the week, I'm still going to date Susan and Gina, and he goes through the list. He goes, so will you marry me? What? You think exclusive love is fair in that situation? You think it's okay for a young man or a young woman to demand that she gets all the love of her fiancé? And none of us go, yeah, the boy's right, follow him. No. All of us go, no, that'd be an idiot if you accepted that proposal. And yet when God demands it, we kind of get our feathers ruffled. How dare God ask for everything? Does He know how hard I've worked to build my life? He's been working hard to build your life through you. Don't you know how hard He's worked? And so it's not selfish. It's just a sign of how much He loves, that He won't settle for anything less than your total love for Him. Are we willing to be followers of Jesus? Jesus was drawing a line in the sand, so to speak, with these people. He said, this is the line. If you want to follow me, step over the line. Realize you have to leave everything else behind. You have to make me the focus. And it's always been that way with Jesus. When He called His first disciples, you can look in Matthew chapter 4 when He's calling His very first disciples. He walks up to them, and there is the first two sitting on a boat mending nets because they were fishermen. And Jesus says, follow me. And they stopped mending their nets and walked away from their careers to follow Jesus. They left it all behind and said, okay, God, you're in charge. I'll follow you. I'll trust you. And they left it all behind. They went a little bit further down and they came across two brothers and their father sitting in their boats. And Jesus said to the brothers, come and follow me. And guess what they did? They said, no, we have to take care of our dear father. He's taught us everything we know, and he's old and he can't do it himself, so we have to stay here and take care of him. No. They left everything, including dear old dad sitting in the boat, and went and followed Jesus. Ever since, Jesus has been asking people to follow Him. It's been an all or nothing proposition. Follow me. Follow me. Follow me. And so often we start off, well, yes, God, I'll follow you with everything we already have. I remember that in my life. When God finally refocused my life after me being distracted and rebellious. He said, and the youth have heard this a bunch, he said to me one day while I was singing in church, either get serious or get out. He didn't want a fan, he didn't want a fake, he wanted a follower. And I had that choice, and it was like I heard audible words. I know it wasn't audible, but it was that real to me. And so I said, okay, I'm going to get serious. I was 17 years old when I said I was going to get serious. How many of you know that at the age of 17 you have a lot of distractions found in the opposite gender? And God said, follow me with all that you are and have. But God, she's really cute. I don't care. Follow me with all that you are and have. But she'd be perfect, God. I know, because I find her really attractive and she comes to church. That's good, God, huh? Good. Follow me with all that you are and have. You can't say it was an easy choice to make. In fact, I can almost say that it was, well, I can say definitely it was one of the hardest things I've ever done, to learn to follow him with all that I am. A verse that a dear saint that came to our youth group. She was about 80-something years old. Been a Christian forever. And she got up and said, if there's anything you remember, and I'm thinking, what does she have to teach us? But God said, listen, I'll tell you. Because I want you to try to live out this verse. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he'll give you the desires of your heart. We tend to delight ourselves in a lot of things and ask God to bless the desires of our heart. But God says, delight in me. That means make him the reason we get up in the morning. Make him the reason we do everything. Make him our all, and he'll give us the desires of our heart. Now, there's a catch in that. There always is a catch, huh, Pastor? Yeah, because when he's your desire and your delight, he gives you more of himself. And it's a great thing. But I took this lady's challenge in, and it took me about 4 years to finally get to the point where I could say, God is my everything. He is all I want nothing else. I'd watch my brothers and all my friends get married and start having kids, and there was me, the single guy. I was still popular because I had a pickup truck, and whenever they wanted to move, they called me, but I was a single guy. But I got to the point where God was my everything, and I wanted nothing else. I wasn't looking for anything else. Back when I was interested in dating, I had my list. I knew what kind of girl I wanted. I actually wrote it out. I was one of those guys. I wrote it out. I knew how many kids I wanted. I wrote it out. But when I made God my everything, he gave me more of him, but then he decided to surprise me by giving me way beyond what I could imagine. Because here's my list of who I wanted and what I wanted in life, and God said, that's nothing. Here's what I'm going to give you. See, I wanted 4 kids. I thought that'd be cool. It'd be a nice big family, 4 kids. I got 10 kids. God blew that out of the water. Everything I had listed for a future spouse, Aaron blew out of the water. And I wasn't looking. God just said, guess what? Surprise. Because he was my everything. And all through our courting, and even when I proposed to her, I always told her she would be a really distant second for the rest of my life. But she didn't take that as an insult. She took that as a compliment, because she knows if I keep God number one, it'll all work out. Are we willing to do that? Are we willing to lay it all on the line, our dreams, our desires? You see, God doesn't want to be part of your life. He wants to be your life. And until we make him our life, the parts of our life will still be frustrating. Whether you're a student in school, you'll be frustrated by school until you make God your life. If you're working, you might have a job that you enjoy now, but it won't be fulfilling in a few years unless God is your life. And then you can end up in the same job for the rest of your life and you'll enjoy it. We need to make God our everything. Are we willing to do this? This is really a choice when it boils down to it. This goes back to our first point in the first question I asked, and that was the whole idea of what in our life are we not willing to let God interfere with? Well, it kind of comes down to this idea. And that is, it's a choice between God being on the throne of our life and being Lord, or us being on the throne of our life and being Lord. That's what it boils down to. If he is not your all, then he is nothing at all. No. I still believe he can help me when I pray. So he's your emergency life ring if you find yourself drowning. I don't think God ever says he wants to be that. He wants to be the Lord of all. He wants to be your life. That's why he says you have to forsake these things, turn your back on them. Get to the point where your compassion for me is so strong that your compassion for other things seems like hate. I need you to follow me with everything that you are and have. In fact, we looked at that. It's found in most of the Gospels, but one particular place is Mark chapter 12, verse 30, where it says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. If I love God with everything I am and have, I don't have time to love other people in myself. But if I love God with everything I am and have, all my heart, my soul, my mind, and my strength, he loves me back, and that love overflows to all the people that I'm in contact with. So they don't feel neglected or left out because I love God so much. They feel loved even better because I love God so much. Are we willing to make God our priority and to love him completely? It'll only happen if we look at those three examples that God gives us at the end of this. The example of the builder, and the example of the king, and then the salt. And it brings us to our third point. When following God, realize he won't share us. And be willing to accept the cost of being a follower. You won't find any greater peace, any greater fulfillment, any greater joy than completely following him. You'll never find it outside of following him. You might try to add them to the other things you think they're going to bring peace, fulfillment, and joy, but they never will. It'll always leave you wanting, always leave you struggling, always leave you wondering, where is God? And God says, I'm here, just accept me totally, and watch what I'll do. Stop being a fan of me. Yeah, you like me because I bring healing. Yeah, you like me because I bring peace. Yeah, you like me because I'll provide for you. But you don't like me when I say, I want you to follow me with all. And I need you to make me everything. And so as we look at these examples here, when following God, realize he won't share us, and we need to be willing to accept the cost. If we don't count the cost, we won't continue the life of faith, and we won't finish it. That's what these parables are talking about. They were getting ready to start projects to do things. And God says, suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't he sit down and look at the cost it's going to take? And if he doesn't have the money, he won't start it because he'll look foolish if he starts it and then stops. Remember, this is an example about following Jesus. How many people follow Jesus and don't count the cost? And so they get in the middle of the situation and go, oh, I didn't realize he meant this, God. I'm sorry. I'm not that committed. I'm out of here. It happens. Every day it happens. Because people want to follow the blessings and not the Lord. And we need to be willing to count the costs. If we don't count the costs, we won't be able to finish. I want you to consider counting the costs as you listen to this.
Cost of following Jesus. The Bishop J.C. Ryle once said, nothing causes so much backsliding amongst disciples as not letting them know basically what they are taking in hand. It was A.W. Tozer that said there's only one of two things that we can do with the cross: flee it or die upon it. The late Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, when Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die. In the Bible, in chapter 9, verse 23 of the Gospel of Luke, Jesus said, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. What will following Christ cost a disciple? Well, it can cost you your reputation. It can cost you your comfort. It can cost you friendships. It can even cause family tensions. It can cost you your job security. It can cost a lot. In fact, it can ultimately cost you your life, as we've seen with the disciples of Jesus, as we see even today with certain Christians who are dying at the hands of ISIS or others throughout the world. We know also that it's important for us to count the costs costs before we sign up for this thing called Christianity. Now, we get into Christianity purely by faith and a sovereign work of God in our life. But Jesus was clear. He let people know the cost when he invited people to follow him. Now, when I was in India on a mission trip several years ago, it was the first time I was ever in the presence of people who were beaten for the gospel. I was in a village to the north and I saw several people who were just freshly beaten for the gospel. One guy was a new convert, and he was warned that if he goes back to his village, that his hands and feet would be cut off, and that his family, I think they said that they would pour kerosene all over his family and burn them to death. And I remember in that moment being torn up. In fact, one of the guys that was with us on the mission trip asked somebody to pray, and as we started praying, I wanted to run as far as I possibly could get and cry out loud. I was so overwhelmed in that moment. And I was about to preach, and I felt so unworthy. I mean, who am I from America? For us, we're suffering if we don't have padded seats in our churches. And these people sat for 4 hours on hard concrete. Some of the people walked 10 miles to this village just to hear the gospel preached. And they were looking at me as the trained authority, and I felt as though I had so much to learn from them. I felt so unworthy. And here, after hearing about this person who, he can't even go back home without worrying about his hands and feet being cut off and his family being, martyred. And another guy from India, he said he's ready to die for the gospel. In other words, he's counting the cost. And I was overwhelmed. It was the first time I felt the gravity of the gospel in new proportions. Because when I was going to get up to preach, I knew that I may be sending these people to their death. And I had to really think about what it is that I believe and stand for. Jesus said, if anyone would come after me, we must deny ourselves and take up our cross and follow him. As I just said, would you consider following Jesus? He died for us so that we would be willing to live for him and even die if needed.
Have you counted the cost? Are you willing to count the cost? Or you just want the benefits that come with being a fan? Because today, as we look at not a fan, but a fully committed follower of Jesus, he's drawing that line in the sand for each of us, saying, here's the line that you step over if you want to be a follower of mine. Count the costs. Yeah, the benefits are worth it, but count the cost, because you will have to pay them. When we look at doing this and counting the costs, we need to ask ourselves, are we willing to give it all up? Not parts of it, not the parts that we like or think are presentable or parts that aren't that important. Hey, God, I have 3 pets. If you want to take them, that's fine. I won't have to feed them anymore. Praise God. No, it's not that kind of thing. It's count the costs. Are you willing to give it all up? Because the great news is, when we are willing to give it all up, God always gives back what is good and what is needed for following him. There might be some good things he doesn't give back because it's not needed for following him. But he always gives back what is good and needed so that we can follow him. As I look at this room, I see a potential that is unstoppable. I see the potential impact to not only change this area, but to reach around and change the entire world, sitting right here. And I'm not just saying that because it sounds like a nice thing a pastor could say. I'm saying that because I know what God can do when he gets hold of a life that is completely committed to following him. That says, I'll give it all, God, and I'll do whatever you want. I could talk to you about single women who gave up relationships and any chance at relationships when they went overseas as missionaries. One of them is Lillian Thrasher. Maybe you don't know that name. If you travel to Egypt, you'll find that name is very highly revered in the government of Egypt. She's one of the few foreign women that is honored by the nation of Egypt. Why? Because she went as a missionary to Egypt, and being a woman in that culture, she bombed completely. People didn't want to listen to a woman, so she was walking one day, crying out to God, going, God, I'm a failure as a missionary. And she was walking outside of one of the big cities. Right outside the city, being in Egypt, was a desert. And as she was walking and praying and crying, she heard someone else crying. She goes, what on earth is that? And she followed the cries to a bundle that was slowly being covered by sand as the wind was blowing, and she picked up this bundle, and it was a baby. Because it was completely acceptable in Egypt that if you had a child that was unpresentable or unacceptable that you didn't want, it was okay to take him out to the desert and leave him there to die. That was fine. And she realized what was going on, and most of the babies that were left out there were girls. Because every good Egyptian man wanted a son to carry on the family name. And so there was a lot of these girls. So she made it her life's mission to go and collect up as many of these babies as she could find. And there might be one a day, one a week, but sometimes there were dozens. And she started these orphanages in Egypt, and she gave education to these kids. And as she continued to do this, it was not only girls that they found, but also boys with deformities and other things that made them unpresentable or unwanted. And soon these orphanages were caring for thousands. But one of the neat things that they did is they gave each kid a quality education. And it was such a good education that when these children were graduating, they were sought out by the university. And then the university was so highly respected, the government went and found the top students, which happened to be the orphans that went through this orphanage. And so one lady who was a failure at her chosen calling and missions discovered what God had for her, and she gave it all. And she helped form and impact the government of a nation. Yeah, it took 40 years until these kids were old enough to be in, but it still impacted. And so the government said, we need to honor the mother of Egypt. Because she did so much good for the nation. Why? Because she gave it all, and I could give you story after story of people in our country and outside of our country who said, enough is enough, I don't want to hold back anymore, I'm going to give God everything. And so they pour their lives into serving God, and God turns the world upside down where they are and even around the world because of their willingness. My question for us today goes back to that first question as we close. What areas of your life are you not willing to let God interfere in? Because if you can think of any, then you can think of the reasons why God isn't Lord of all. Why you're not following Him, you're just a fan of His. And today God's challenging us to be fully committed